players gather to cast powerful spells, some of the oldest and most powerful in the history of Magic the Gathering. Brainstorm, ponder, consider, and many others. Battling head-to-head in brutal combat, they all have one thing in common: to uphold their legacy and the search for eternal glory.
The Eternal Glory podcast is brought to you by the minds behind BoshNRoll on YouTube, Thraben University, and theepicstorm.com. This episode is sponsored by Eminence Gaming.
Hello, and welcome to episode 98 of the Eternal Glory podcast, Tech or Trash. We've already recorded 30 minutes of introductions and banter for the week, available in our supporter-exclusive pre-show. Check out patreon.com/eternalglory to gain access, or join as a YouTube member for the same content, but on YouTube instead. As always, I'm Phil Gallagher, aka ThrabenU, joined by...
I'm Brian Coval, aka BoshNRoll.
I am Brian Cook of theepicstorm.com.
Shout out to our new members who just enjoyed the pre-show, LN997 and Bobby. Simply Bobby, like Cher or Madonna. Shout out to Bobby.
Yeah, this week's pre-show is thick. We ran a little long, but it's full of good stuff.
It's bonus content. More bang for your buck. Buck up and go over to patreon.com/eternalglory.
And another place you might want to check out is Eminence Gaming. If you're interested in running an event or want your LGS to do so, but are worried about the logistics of it, check out Eminence Gaming's Command Tower software. You can create and manage 4-player or 1v1 tournaments easily, and its unique pairing system ensures that you don't get paired against the same players multiple times. Visit eminence.events for more details. And with that being said, it's time to get into the trenches, and we're gonna fight tonight. Tonight is Tech or Trash. I spent an hour or so combing through deck lists, looking for hidden gems, questionable cards, and we're going to try to sort out which is which here on the pod today. And we'll be doing this live. All I've done is list the card names. We've had no pre-discussion, so it's going to be wild in here.
Plus, Phil told me that I could be a heel tonight, so dig in.
Oh god, please don't get us canceled. Or yourself. We have to work with you. Bryant being a heel aside, we would like to preface this episode by saying that all of this is in good fun, and we appreciate innovation and legacy wherever it comes from, even if we think it looks suspicious. What do we know? You've probably done the math if we go after your pet card here, and we haven't. We're just coming at it in good fun. All of these cards are like that scene at the start of the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie where they're underwater, under an upside-down boat, breathing in the air pocket. Orlando Bloom is like, this is either genius or madness. And Captain Jack Sparrow is like, funny how often those traits coincide. That's what we're talking about here. Genius or madness, and maybe a little bit of both. Shout out to the legacy innovators out there. Now let's attack your personal choices.
All right. So as I started making the deck list, I obviously clicked on Death and Taxes first, and I've got 3 or 4 spicy meatballs here for you. And the first one I think I'm going to have to read verbatim, because this card only exists in paper. It's from the Warhammer 40k Commander decks. Canoptek Scarab Swarm. 4 colorless mana for a 1/1 flying insect creature with feeder mandibles. When Canoptek Scarab Swarm enters the battlefield, exile target player's graveyard. For each artifact or land exiled this way, create a 1/1 colorless insect artifact creature token with flying. So, gentlemen, genius or jank?
Trash.
I mean, Death and Taxes is built on X1s with marginal abilities, and flying is frequently how they end up winning a game. While I am deeply dubious about this, no flash on this thing. It costs 4. There's no alternate casting costs other than like vialing it in. I guess you got to do something on your way between every card in your deck and Yorion and Solitude on that Aether Vial. I'm not sold on this one. It doesn't seem fast enough to interact with the things you really want to attack a graveyard over, and it doesn't seem win-conny enough to spend 4 mana on either.
All right. I think as far as something looking to serve as graveyard hate versus a combo deck, this is shit. This is not unplayable. You know, like a rest in peace feels slow by this format standard. But how is this against, say, like a hot Bant deck or a lands deck, where this is not a hate card, but you view this as this ancillary gets rid of some annoying stuff and makes 5/1/1s? How is that at a 4-mana slot that is recruiterable and blinkable?
As an Uro gamer, I am personally offended by the existence of this card, and I never want to see it played. That said, we are a deck with Force of Will and Dress Down. Dress Down is a card where maxing out however many copies we have in the 75 will be in the deck against Death and Taxes. It seems like a blowout waiting to happen, but also, if it does happen, it's going to be hard to come back from.
To also further the example about Rest in Peace, let's say you needed a creature. Let's say you had to find a creature for a Recruiter of the Guard that exiles target player's graveyard. There's already a better option. You have Remorseful Cleric, the 2/1 Flying Spirit that you could sacrifice and exile target player's graveyard. A much more playable card than this. Yes, you don't get the value from this Scarab, but I think overall, you'd rather your Aether Vial be on 2 rather than 4 anyway. I understand ticking up towards Yorion, but this card just doesn't compare to Remorseful Cleric in my eyes. I mean, what would it be if we didn't mention the fact that D&T players every month asking for Rest in Peace Bear? You're not owed anything. Rest in Peace Bear, I hope it never comes, just so that way the meme can live on forever.
We got Rest in Peace Bear. It costs black. It's a 3/2 with Shadow, and it only affects your opponents, and you can cast all their cards. It's there. Just add a color. Whiners.
So interestingly, when I thought Bryant was going down the tutorable graveyard hate card, I thought he was going to be going for Lion Sash, honestly, which is another thing that can kind of be tutorable while also sort of chipping away at the graveyard.
Yeah, Lion Sash, the existence of Lion Sash, a card I obviously know exists, but haven't played D&T in a while. That's tutorable on multiple axes because you can Stoneforge it and you can recruit it. And it comes in Vial on 2, and it gains value while exiling graveyards, and it operates at instant speed once it's there, or if you can surprise it through a Vial. I'm not feeling Canoptech Scarab Swarm, unless the person who registered this list is just in a field full of mono Uro decks and needs some way to shut the door in the mid-game.
Yeah, I can see the world where this card fucks. You play it, you junk your opponent's graveyard, you get 4/1/1s, you blink it, you exile your own graveyard, you get a couple more, maybe a Vial got blown up or something along the way, a couple Wastelands in there. I can see it, but it does feel like it's working a little hard.
For sure. And we've just spent 6 minutes talking about a card I had never heard of before we started this conversation. Let's move on to the next one. I'm sick of this thing.
Okay. So I'm going to consider the next two as kind of one card because the theory is the same. I ran into multiple Death and Taxes deck lists playing both a playset of Chrome Mox and some Gemstone Caverns as well. So, is this genius or is this jank? This is being played alongside Aether Vial, not instead of it.
We just came from a format where Initiative was the best deck, and a lot of these Death and Taxes players were forced to play something else, and they got a little bit of a taste of, ooh, how nice it was to have Turn 1 Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, or Turn 1 Archon of Emeria. So I understand the desire to want to bring something you just enjoyed back to your previous pet deck. So it makes a lot of sense why people would explore this. That said, I believe these choices made more sense pre-Eldraine. In Eldraine, when that set came out, I thought the best thing that could have happened for D&T actually happened with Deafening Silence, because the issue with D&T in the past was that it really struggled to bridge the gap until turn 2 for Thalia. And now you have Deafening Silence into your Thalia. A lot of lists even run 2 Mindbreak traps in the board. You don't have to make yourself faster. Just play to the speed of your deck. I think that this decision to play Chrome Mox and Gemstone Cavern in Death and Taxes is ultimately a bust.
I did notice that the list that Phil linked us to here is a Yorion Taxes list, which has a lower density of Aether Vial, which is generally the thing Death and Taxes wants to be doing on turn 1. It's like Mother of Runes or Aether Vial, and you have 20 more cards that can miss on those two things, and that basic Plains Go start to a game just feels so bad. I could see wanting to turn on Spirit of the Lab, Stoneforge Mystic, Thalia, previously mentioned Lion Sash, all of those. It does level up your turn 1 plays by a lot, but it's at the expense of long-term card advantage.
I don't think the long-term card advantage is theoretically a problem, right? Because the idea is most fair decks, should you reach the end game of Yorion plus Caracas, like it is a real pain to try to grind through that. So losing out on a card in the early game is in theory not that big of a deal, should improve your matchup versus combo. I would be on board with exploring this as an idea. So the deck list that I've linked here, I'm not sure on pronunciation, it vaguely looks French, spelled Parrotlet, Parrotlet, Parallel, question mark. I don't know how it's supposed to be pronounced. I don't know what language this is. I don't like the supporting cast they've got here. There's just like so many colorless lands. If we count Gemstone Caverns as colorless, it's Gemstone Caverns plus 4 Rishadenport plus 4 Wasteland plus 3 Urza's Saga. That is just like a lot of things that don't cast white cards, and that definitely makes me nervous.
Yep, hard to disagree with that. I know you have always been a proponent of playing more white sources in your Death and Taxes decks, and I did play Death and Taxes one league recently on my channel, and it definitely comes up still, where you just have 3 colorless lands and a Caracas, and then you're the deck losing to Wasteland all of a sudden.
All right, I'll keep my opening hand with Caracas, Gemstone Caverns, Aganjo, Blood Moon, F. It's a thing. It happens. Like, basics are good.
For sure.
All right, I've got one more for you here, and I think I probably need to read this because I think a good portion of our Legacy gamers have never played against this card, and that is Oust. 1 white sorcery, put target creature into its owner's library, second from the top, its controller gains 3 life.
This card was an absolute heater in its standard run, but that standard format did not contain Swords to Plowshares or Solitude. What are we doing?
How long ago was Rise of the Eldrazi? Like 13 years? Something like that?
It was 2010. It was when I was living in England. Yes. The 2 pre-releases I attended when I was studying abroad in England were World Wake and Rise of the Eldrazi. I remember this very specifically. I didn't really bring my Legacy collection over with me, and I built standard decks out of my pack winnings at FNMs. And I played a lot of Gideon Jura plus Oust decks. They lined up extremely well against the mana dorks, like Arbor Elf decks, because ousting a mana dork is probably better than Swords to Plowsharing or bolting it, because not only is it gone on the turn you want it, which is turn 1 and 2, you have to draw it again on turn 3 and then replay it. It's kind of card advantage in that way. This is Legacy. Like I guess I would need to see the context of the whole list and what this metagame looks like, but I struggle to believe this card is better than
Path to Exile.
Yeah, if you need a 9th spot removal spell.
The list did not have Path to Exiles. It had 4 Oust. And I think missing some things like Merit Lodge that you just need to hit at instant speed is so important, especially with, like A plus B creature combo decks existing, like your Cephalid Breakfast sorts of things. Being able to disrupt things at instant speed is huge. I think Oust being a sorcery is usually going to be enough to keep it out of the realms of playability. This one, straight down the toilet for me.
And we still have March of Otherworldly Light that's gone untapped into in this list. We went straight to Oust. Is this metagame just exclusively Death Shadow? Like, what are we doing here? I would want to know all the context, but this is the one that I am most suspicious of so far by a lot.
All right, so let's do our wrap up rating for the D&T section. Oust, absolute jank. Chrome Mox and Gemstone Caverns. Where did we land on those? Acceptable, worth testing.
It is an angle that I think is worth exploring, though we also have 13 years of data that D&T works without these things.
All right, and the Scarab Swarm, thumbs down.
Trash.
I get it. I'll say I get it, but I am suspicious of it.
Maybe for your local store. Might be right for your local store. So we're going to move on to deck number 2, which is Moon Stompy, or whatever you want to call it. And I had to read a card this time around. I had never seen this one before. The first one is Invasion of Regatha, which is a battle. So it's 2 and a red for a 5. Are they loyalty still? What are the battle corner things?
They are not loyalty. I forget what they actually are, though. This came up on the receivables that I just watched. I forget what they're called.
All right.
Battle points.
5 shurikens in the corner. When Invasion of Regatha enters the battlefield, it deals 4 damage to another target battle or opponent and 1 damage up to 1 target creature. The transform side is a 4/4 prowess. If non-creature sources you control would deal damage to a creature, battle, or opponent, it deals that much damage plus 2 instead. Bryant is just making an incredibly pained face that I think sums up my thoughts on this one as well.
I faced this in a league, and the pain face is mostly that this person built their deck with Invasion of Regatha in it, but then also in their Moon Stompy deck that has Chalice of the Void and Trinisphere, all these hateful cards, had main deck copies of Maddening Hex to support this card. And I was just like, what are we doing here? Did your 80% matchup need to be 99%? Like, why is that a good deck building decision? And that's what I was just thinking. I mean, I was going to trash this person's deck on air, but I said I would be a heel tonight. What are you doing? At least you have a coherent strategy in your deck. Come on.
Not losing to Storm is a strategy that I can co-sign. We all know that when I brew jank for my channel, I start my sideboard with 3 Deafening Silence, 2 Null Rod, and then we figure out the rest. Beating Storm has saved a lot of 05s on my channel. The 1/4 where I beat Storm in the last round. Specifically against Storm aside, and we didn't talk about Invasion in that situation. We talked about all the hate cards that were around Invasion. I have played this card in Limited, where it's solid. My issue is, Bryant kind of addressed it already, which is that non-creature sources aren't usually doing the damage in a red Stompy deck. They do have some Planeswalkers, they might top out at Fiery Confluence, they might have Stomp. This isn't like a Lightning Bolt deck. You're not going to get a lot out of your Torbrand effect on the backside. And the front side, going upstairs for 4 is a lot. Like Flames of the Bloodhand was a finisher in its standard format. 3 mana for 4 damage is a good conversion rate if you're a burn deck. But I don't know that Red Stompy is a burn deck. And they have to sink 5 damage into this invasion before it becomes a 4/4 creature. Like, at what point are you getting your money back on the investment of how much damage you spent to get this thing to turn into a creature? At which point your untargetable permanent suddenly becomes a creature that dies to Swords to Plowshares before it does any damage. Like, this just seems like a lot going on, or a lot that could go wrong. And what if you're in top deck mode, which frequently happens in Red Stompy, if your opponent's doing any sort of interaction, like Force of Will, your Blood Moon, Prismatic Ending, your Chalice. Now we're both just hoping that we draw the big card first, and you draw Invasion of Regatha, and your opponent's at 17 and not 4. That sucks. I can also see hero moments where like the board gets Supreme Verdicted, and you just got to get those last 4 points across. Is Flames of the Bloodhand what we're looking for?
So I want to talk about this whole life total thing in regards to battles. I recently played a league with Invasion of Tarkir, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. And I was finding that I literally could not afford to take a turn off to flip the battle because my combo opponents had relevant things to do with their life total. Cycling Street Wraith, casting Doomsday, reanimating Grizzlebrand, paying 7 for Grizzlebrand, ad naus. Like, I absolutely could not take a turn off to flip the battle into the side that makes the payoff worth it. And I think if you're playing a battle in Legacy, you really need to ask yourself, like, is the juice worth the squeeze? And with this one, it totally is not.
We do have another battle coming up on the list that I'm much more interested in, but I don't know about this thing. Also, I looked it up. They are defense counters that go on to battles.
Defense counters. Okay. All right. So the next one is Cursed Mirror.
I actually know what this one does because it's in my Godo CDH deck. It's 2 and a red for an artifact. It taps for a red, and then as it enters the battlefield, you may have it become a copy of target creature that's on the battlefield until end of turn. It gains haste. So in CDH, you would copy a Godo Bandit Warlord. You get the other half of the Helm combo, and you win. Phil, what does this do in Moon Stompy? So let's say you play a Turn 1 Rabble Master, and you're not playing a matchup where the prison pieces matter, hypothetically. Turn 2, you play a Curse Mirror. You can copy Rabble Master for 1 turn and it gains haste. Is that worthy of seeing play? What are you trying to do with this card if that's not the play?
Okay, that's so much damage, first of all. Like, you get an extra goblin. So you have a goblin from turn 1. You have 2 goblins from turn 2, plus the Rabble Masters themselves, and they're like, everything's going to trigger off each other. That is a gajillion damage. More frequently, what happens is in the mid game, you play a Caves of Chaos Adventurer, you copy it with Cursed Mirror, you get an extra step through the Undercity, and get 5 additional hasty damage. I have been impressed with this card. Like, it's a mana rock when you don't have something to copy, and when you do have something to copy, it is usually worth a pretty absurd amount of damage. It's an embarrassing top deck sometimes, but this one passes the playability marker for me. Maybe only as like a one of, but I was impressed.
This one rose to prominence when initiative was everywhere in the meta, because you don't have to copy your own thing. If you copy your opponent's White Plume Adventurer, now you have the initiative, and you get a clap in with your 3/3 if you want it, or you could just protect your mana rock. And it is a way to steal the initiative based off of someone's own initiative creature. So that's when it came up. I imagine it got a little worse when fewer opponents are doing the thing you want to do with Cursed Mirror. It did earn its stripes during that time, and I can see wanting a little bit of that around.
That is a really cool usage of that card.
We're going to go ahead and move on to 8-cast now. I want to start with Spatial Contortion, which is being played as a Dismember alternative. So for those of you who weren't around during Oath of the Gatewatch, this is 1 and 1 colorless. Like, you actually need colorless mana, or target creature gets +3/-3 until end of turn. I'm going to just front load this one. I think this card sucks. I think it is so important to be able to literally have Dismember. Dismember for 1 regular mana gets rid of things like Collector Oof that you care about. And I think it's so important to be able to get yourself out from under Collector Oof or another card of that nature with minimal mana investment.
Yeah, I could see that. Like, the thing you said is absolutely true. I can also see you have to take 4 to answer a Dragon's Rage Channeler that may or may not have 3 power at this point, and it always feels bad when you have to use Dismember against a deck that's actively pressuring your life total. Like, someone who's zenithing for Collector Oof is a different sort of calculation than which of these 2/3 power 1 drops am I gonna spend 4 life to remove. And in that spot, I'd rather have Spatial Contortion, even if it is more susceptible to daze. The life total does matter. You're an Ancient Tomb deck. You want to stay out of burn range as long as you can. I understand the appeal to it. I think Dismember's probably better, but I get it.
Bryant is just making frowny faces in the corner. I'll assume he has no opinion here. We'll move up to the next spicy one.
He hates 8-cast, the Chalice of the Void deck with 8 forces and a fast clock. We don't talk about 8-cast.
Yep.
I mean, I think that you two just covered it. I mean, there wasn't really a whole lot else to say. I also think that, like, when you're the blue deck, blue's core is bouncing. It has the best bounce spells in the game. We've already talked about marches. The blue march doesn't really solve Collector Oof either. So you probably do need some sort of permanent removal for Collector Oof specifically. And these are really the only 2 options.
All right. Next up is Patchwork Automaton. So this is 2 colorless mana for a 1/1 Ward 2. Whenever you cast an artifact spell, it gets a +1/+1 counter.
I've really only seen this card in Steel Stompy variants. I haven't seen it in 8-cast yet. But I don't feel like I don't feel like 8-cast struggles to get the job done ever since Urza Saga. Kind of just like, it makes 12/12s and 2 activations and then it just clocks your opponent to death. And it can even gain trample using Shadow Spear. I don't think that Patchwork Automaton does anything for the deck that the deck doesn't already naturally do.
Yeah, Automaton also reads when you cast an artifact spell. It's not when an artifact enters the battlefield. Kappa Cannoneer is when it enters. I guess Psy is also on trigger, or on it's a cast trigger. So you do have one thing that wants you to cast spells already, but a lot of the spells in the deck, there's like 8 cast, the creatures, they're not going to trigger this thing. Activating Saga and Tutoring with Saga don't trigger it. If you Ancient Tomb it on turn 1 and then go like Bauble, Mox Opal, you're miles ahead in that game. But like Brian said, I don't know that 8 cast needs the help here. Though I did recently adapt vintage aggro shops into Legacy using Urza's Workshop. And Patchwork Automaton was a backbone of that deck, which kind of is in that Steel Stompy range that Bryant mentioned. And this thing is an absolute monster in modern hardened scale strategies. There's a lot of places it's a really cool card. I just don't know that 8cast is a home for it.
Yeah, that is exactly my thoughts on the card. Like, very reasonable card. Like, I have won vintage games with that card. I don't think you need it here. I think it doesn't add anything new to the deck.
The next card I added, which is Hull Breacher, a card that is not really tech, but it's unique to seeing play in ACAST specifically. Matthew Vuk's showcase list played Hull Breacher, and I have to imagine that the thought was, if you look at the metagame data for Legacy at the moment, 8cast is by far the best performing deck so far post-ban. And if you're going to tech for the mirror, well, Hull Breacher seems like a really good option. In fact, I think Control decks should probably revisit the Narset Hull Breacher plan. I don't know if you want Days Undoing, but if 8cast is the best deck in the format, Hull Breacher seems like a perfect answer inside of it and outside of it. I think that this was a brilliant piece of tech from Matthew Vuk.
Yeah, I agree. It cracks the mirror for sure. As a control player, frequently I'm saying, like, I need to be alive until I resolve a Narset. That's the only time I feel safe playing your own Narset effect, especially one in an Ancient Tomb deck. Like, you can turn 1 Hull Breacher out of 8cast, and that's going to mess up a lot of decks. Like, you bring that in every combo matchup, every control matchup, cracks the mirror. Makes a lot of sense.
So I am a notorious hater of the mono blue Hull Breacher Days Undoing deck. I just think that deck often does not win the game, even when they do their whole draw 7 thing. Like, it just does not guarantee a win. Like, that deck just does not close the game quickly. You know what does close the game quickly? A Hull Breacher backed up by like a Kappa Cannoneer. A Hull Breacher followed by Urza's Saga. Hull Breacher is a lot scarier when there is another thing other than its 3 points of power that's also pressuring your opponent, because they don't have time to draw out or otherwise find an answer. And I am a big fan of this here. This one feels like genius to me.
All right, let's talk about Izzet Delver, which is a place where we've seen quite a bit of innovation with new cards. The first one we alluded to already. I'm going to start with Invasion of Tarkir. It's a 2-mana battle, 1 and a red. It has 5 starting defense. And when it enters the battlefield, it deals 2 damage to any target plus X, where X is the number of dragons you reveal. So Murktide Regent is a dragon. And another card on our Delver list here is Sprite Dragon, which fell out of favor, but being a dragon now sort of gives extra value to Invasion of Tarkir. Getting 3 or 4 damage to any target for 2 mana is a pretty good deal. When you flip your battle, you get a 4/4 dragon that when any dragon attacks, it deals 2 to any target. That's a lot of stats. It's a reasonable rate burn spell up front. You're not that excited about a shock, but if you get an Incinerate out of it, it's doing okay. If you ever flip it, we talked about the invasion of deal 4 damage before.
Invasion of not playable in Legacy.
Yeah, that one we talked about, like, what is the payoff of flipping this thing? You put 5 damage into it to get a 4/4. Invasion of Tarkir, you put 5 damage into it and you get 6 damage right away. You get a 4/4 that deals 2 when it attacks. But it also triggers off every other dragon. Any Sprite Dragons or Murktides you have laying around are also going to trigger. The first flipped Invasion of Tarkir immediately flips the second. Like, you end step bolt the invasion, you get the 4/4, you play another invasion, shock their blocker, attack the first invasion for 6, and now you have 2 of these dragons, and they do stack, so you're casting multiple shocks every time any dragon attacks. that game is going to end very quickly. And I played Dragon Delver on the channel just this week, and I was impressed by how often just having 4 additional burn spells in your deck matters. Like, you can go upstairs a lot better. It's worth the investment to flip the dragon, and then sometimes it's not, and you just kill your opponent. There's also a really crazy thing with Chain Lightning. Chain Lightning deals 3 to any target, and then that target's controller can pay red to copy Chain Lightning. You control the battle, even if your opponent is defending it. Chain Lightning with 3 mana immediately flips your Invasion of Tarkir. Just self-copy, and then you get a dragon. And Chain Lightning is a card that Delver plays anyway. There's a lot to like about this one.
Okay, I didn't know about that interaction. That's dope.
Yep. When it happened to me the first time, there is video footage of me going, okay, they're going to deal 3 to this. I don't have red to send it back. Wait, it's not mine! And then immediately the thing flipped and I died.
This seems much better than I expected. Like, I was like, it's kind of cute. This seems legitimately good.
Yeah, I frequently revealed 1 or 2 dragons. There were even spots in my league where it's like mid-brainstorm. It's like, oh, my opponent will be at 4 after combat. I'll keep Sprite Dragon and Murktide Regent in my hand, and then just 4 them. It's a very interesting mode of this deck.
There's some subtle things that I don't like about this. This is replacing other flex slots in the deck. Flex slots that more readily go to the graveyard. I played a Rug version, like Rug Delver, Dragons, Invasion, whatever you want to be calling it. And I was very frequently having trouble getting my Dragon Rage Channelers to become 3/3s and my Tarmogoyfs to become larger because this thing wasn't going to the graveyard. It was either sitting in my hand or sitting in play, whereas something like a Bobble or a Ponder or another Chain Lightning would have already gone to the graveyard, and I wasn't the biggest fan of that. I also wasn't a big fan of this in my mulligan decisions in game 1. So if you are in game 1 and you are playing against a creature deck, Invasion of Tarkir is like a totally reasonable card. And if you're playing against a combo deck, like this is the last thing in the world that I want. I just wasn't a fan of a lot of my flex slots becoming more dubious in terms of informing my mulligan decisions.
Yeah, we had exactly that conversation in my Patreon Discord after I released my video. You are cutting Delver of Secrets for Sprite Dragon, for 1. And then you're cutting the additional Preordains, some number of Baubles. If you're on Chart a Course or Predict, you're cutting those sort of cards for 4 more 2-mana shocks with upside. This deck very much plays like the old Izzet Delver decks. Like, remember Storm Chaser Mage? They were like 2 Fire Blasts at the top end. Those decks from like 2011, 2012, whatever that era was, that was a thing people did. It plays more like that deck. You have a ton of burn. You're just going to the head all the time. If you get too far behind, you are not going to draw out of it because you don't really have card advantage. You just have more burn to make sure once your creatures have to stop attacking, that you can go to the face for the final points. And you just have to play the deck differently.
We've got another one here that's seeing play not only in Blue-Red Delver, but quite a bit elsewhere. And that's Chrome Host Seedshark. 2 colorless and a blue for a 2/4 flying Phyrexian Shark with, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, incubate X, where X is that spell's mana value. And as a reminder, when you incubate, you make a token with X 1/1 counters on it, and for 2 mana, you can turn it into a 0/0 creature. So the dream with this card is play it, cast a Force of Will, incubate 5, pay 2 mana, have a 5/5, and off your 3 mana card plus 2 other mana, you have 7 power. That's the dream.
I think this card is a trap. It reads like Monastery Mentor. It reads like Resolved Shark Typhoon. And it is neither of those things. I think the extra 2 to get your creature on the back end is a big ask. I already don't think that resolving a Shark Typhoon is a particularly powerful effect in Legacy, because then what? Like, you ponder, you get a 1/1, you brainstorm, you get a 1/1, and then you start casting Uro, and now we're doing something different. I don't like that play pattern. And this, you ponder, you get an artifact creature with a plus, or you get an non-creature artifact with a +1 counter on it that someday for 2 mana you can turn it into a non-flying 1/1. I'm not a believer in this. unless you're a deck that can use non-artifact creatures without any meaningful abilities. Like if you have some affinity or something like that, you have Kappa Cannoneers, you have Urza Sagas, tokens, constructs that are going to get bigger. Maybe there's something there, but this is miles away from everything that it looks like it is.
Even in Phil's scenario where you got to live the dream, you played your shark, you cast Forcible, you made the egg, you paid 2, you, what is it called? Incubated. If you told me you could play a 5-mana 5/5, like Delver wouldn't do that anyway. Control decks wouldn't do that anyway. Like this card just doesn't fit the bill. I guess the one nice thing is that the Chrome Host Seedshark blocks Delvers very well. It also like bounces off of a Dragon's Rage channeler, but for 3 mana, I think that this card is asking for a lot. Like your 3 mana cards in Legacy should be winning the game, not bouncing off of Dragon's Rage channelers.
I played this in a Tesserator deck that did have other artifact synergies, and it was pretty solid. And like in that video at the end, I went and said, yeah, I would be excited to explore this in other shells. And then after I stopped recording, I was like, in a fair blue shell, I'm just like pondering, and I'm not excited about this card anymore. I'm not going to go back and edit the video or anything, but I think this card is much more niche than it appears at first glance.
It's not Monastery Mentor, is what I want to tell everyone. This is not the only 2 in a blue 2/4 flyer that we're going to talk about on this episode. And I think this is the less exciting of the two. And the last thing in blue-red that we've seen, List in the 5/0 dump had 4 copies of Bloodbraid Marauder, which is a 2-mana 3/1 that can't block, and if you have Delirium, it has Cascade.
So I've seen this card in other formats from time to time as sort of a mid-game value card. And I guess in Legacy, you're frequently going to be hitting decent things. But this probably comes at a deck building restriction of you can't play Spell Pierce, Minor Misstep, Flusterstorm, or like you play them and you accept that you're going to miss on your Cascades some period of time. I don't know that I'm hyped about this.
Yeah, I mean, none of the cards you just mentioned are in Delver main decks anyway, and you probably board out this dummy against combo decks where you would bring in all your, I guess Minor Misstep sees some fringe play, but Flusterstorm, Spell Pierce, those are generally sideboard cards. The core Delver list is built to get Delirium quickly, like the 4 bauble action deck. The payoff for doing all of that is a 3/1 that also casts Ponder or Lightning Bolt. Or Delver, I guess. Like, I mean, all the hits are good, and if this was just a 2-drop with Cascade, it would be completely busted. But I think doing all the work to get that done is a big ask. And 3/1 can't block? Are those even stats we like in Legacy? I don't know. I'm suspicious.
A 3/1 is not like embarrassing. No one's going to point and laugh or anything.
I will. This episode is called Tech or Trash. This card is trash. Next one. Let's go.
Let's fight over Atraxa again. Specifically, in the context of 4 or 5 color control decks, where are we at regarding natural order for Atraxa these days? And Brian, I guess we'll just throw this one directly to you.
I am softer on natural order and harder on Green Sun Zenith. Can go in the same deck. You can't go one way or the other. People were trying like 60 card decks with Mana Dorks and a couple of Atraxas and natural orders, and then they've kind of emerged into 80 card decks with Yorion, the Green Sun Zenith package, Zenith being able to get Atraxa at the Omega late game, or get green initiative creature, in addition to the Uro, the Coatl, all that, the Leovold, the Grist, all that other stuff that we're used to. I think that's genuinely sick. I don't love mass of Mana Dorks you have to play in a control deck to support natural order, but I do like the natural progression of Zenith to do kind of the same thing if we want to play Atraxa in our deck.
It's interesting. I don't actually view the natural order Green Sun decks as control decks. Like, I more view them as like the Bug Leovold deck that Reduke played at GP Louisville. Like, I view it as an evolution of that, where now those decks play white. Like, those decks are true mid-range decks in my mind. They're not actually control decks. Like, they've always been Mana Dork decks. Like, they're just a different beast.
Yep, that's fair. The next card on our list is another one that's actually, we just came up in the BoshNRoll Discord yesterday. This is Archmage's Charm. One of my Discord mods, shout out to King of the Depths, asked a hypothetical question of, isn't this card good enough? Why hasn't anyone really explored this? And then we had a little conversation about it, and then King of the Depths was in my DMs that night, challenging me to brew around Archmage's Charm. So at some point in the future, there will be a deck on my channel where I have to play 3 copies of this card. All the modes on it are good. The problem is...
I'm going to take a second to just interject with the modes. This is not a commonly played card. So this is 3 blue mana, blue, for choose 1. Counter target spell, target player draws 2 cards, or gain control of target non-land permanent with CMC 1 or less.
Obviously, 3 mana counterspell sucks. We don't even play 2 mana counterspell. We do like stealing Merit Lages and Construct Tokens and Aether Vials and Delvers. That's all good stuff. If you've played Modern ever in your life, you've seen all the cool things this can steal. And then just draw 2 when nothing else is going on is perfectly fine. This is a Modern staple. This card is very good there. The difference is Pyroblast, Daze, Wasteland makes this card very difficult to support contextually, because frequently in the type of Azorius core control deck that I would want to play this sort of effect in, you need 2 or 3 basic planes to make sure you're set up against Wasteland decks with your removal. And any basic planes that you draw is a turn you're not casting Archmage's Charm. It's kind of a lot to ask of a mana base.
I think Brian's covered Archmage's Charm. It's tough to disagree with any of that.
I will be trying it soon, though, and you can bet there will be 0 basic lands that are not islands in that list, because that's just the cost of doing business. You want to cast a card like this. All right, Brian, you want to tee up on Doomsday here, because your boy Ethan has gone mad.
He has. If you're unfamiliar with Ethan Formulacea, they are monkeys can't cry on Magic Online. Who knows if that's actually true? Scientists still haven't figured it out. And Ethan is one of the best Doomsday deck builders and pilots there are. Well, Ethan 5-0'd with a list featuring Liliana the Last Hope, Plunge into Darkness, Paradigm Shift, Cyborg Inverter of Truth, and then other people are playing things like Reanimate and Grief. So we're going to talk about these cards within the context of Doomsday. So I think there's some interesting decisions here. Liliana the Last Hope, you get to mill 2 cards and then return a creature. So that looks pretty good with something like Thassa's Oracle post-Doomsday. Maybe it gives you something to do with some of your extra black mana. It can also return a Street Wraith for what it's worth. So if you have a hand that goes like Dark Ritual, Cabal Ritual, because Doomsday has shifted to being a Cabal Ritual deck. And when you do that, there's often a lot of games where you don't care about the threshold because you have nothing to do with that black mana. So that's one of the uses of Liliana the Last Hope.
What portion of the time are you actually viewing Lily as a combo piece versus... this is a removal spell that can help me win if I make it to that point? Where is this at conceptually? Do you have a feel for that?
I honestly have no clue. It's a little bit on the meme side for me personally, but I can understand the thought process behind it.
Are we just not going to also talk about the fact that this list has Planar Void in the sideboard too? 1 black mana, whenever a card is put into a graveyard, remove that card from the game. This is spicy.
The original Leyline of the Void. That card saw play for years back in the day, Phil.
This is a tech that beats Endurance when you're a Doomsday deck, because your things don't end up anywhere they can be tucked. It's also Graveyard Hate where you want Graveyard Hate naturally. That does make a frustrating amount of sense. Doomsday decks were playing Relic of Progenitus for a little while, where they could poke their own graveyard or exile it completely in response to an Endurance. That's a wild one, but it makes sense. The Grief and Reanimate, I think, is really interesting. Obviously, Monkeys Can't Cry is in the lab on all these other cards, but Grief and Reanimate I've seen pretty steadily. Definitely Grief, and I've seen more Reanimates than I care to talk about. Grief just being another free piece of interaction. You're already a Force of Will deck. You're prepared to 2-for-1 yourself to protect your combo, and Grief is an outlet for all those ritual black mana Bryant was talking about. Then Reanimate can pick up Grief. We've seen Reanimator doing that. That's a whole archetype in Modern. I've also been BTFO'd where I interact with Thassa's Oracle and it ends up in the graveyard. Then they just reanimate it post-Doomsday, and then I die anyway. So there is some spicy tech here, and I don't think I can smash or pass on any of it because I'm not I'm not that deep in the lab on Doomsday. If folks are winning with it and it, like, finding ways for Doomsday to beat the popular hate out of the sideboard, having the bigger the moving target, the better for the Doomsday community. When it was just Shouldered, we learned, like, okay, I'm gonna have to beat a Shouldered game too. But then it's like, oh, it's Reanimate. And then it's like, oh, you're gonna grief me now, and you're gonna cast Othy Voidwalker, you're gonna beat me down post board. And now we're talking about Inverter of Truth. Like, what is going on here? And it becomes a bigger target. Even if Ethan never plays these cards again, a 5-0 was posted that includes them, and now they have to be on the radar of every serious Legacy player when they're playing against Doomsday. And that's just mental strain on the community at large.
I actually think that the paradigm shift tech is the most interesting out of everything we've talked about. Giving Doomsday another way to clear their deck for Thassa's Oracle is quite good. We've seen the Thoughtlash decks, we've seen some of the Merfolk decks that play this card, but for some reason, Doomsday community's never really gotten behind it. And one of the easiest ways that you can beat Doomsday is Thoughtseize your Doomsday, Surgical it. And Surgical is seeing record high plays right now because Reanimator is everywhere. It's on top of Goldfish. So having ways to beat those surgicals, I think, is brilliant.
Yep, absolutely. And I mentioned in previous episodes, I took Cephalid Breakfast to a tournament. I made top 8, and I won with Thassa's Oracle from hand as many times as I won with Thassa's Oracle from graveyard. And just being able to exile your deck and cast that buddy just completely skips a lot of the commonly played hate for these Oracle combo decks.
Yeah, if I had to genius or jank for this section, like I would give this section genius, with the caveat here that I don't understand what the mad scientist is doing or why they are doing it. I just look at the pretty deck list at the end and go like, well, I just think that's neat. Get into the weeds, figure out your in-out numbers for matchups, and then use that to really make an informed decision about what you think about this Doomsday stuff here.
This next deck is Cephalid Breakfast, and the card that I think is a hot topic right now is actually Staff of the Storyteller, and Cephalid Breakfast decks are playing it over the Stoneforge package. They're still playing Shuko because you can get it with Urza Saga, but they're removing Stoneforge Mystic for Staff of the Storyteller, so that way you can outgrind and live a little bit longer against these Delver decks while accruing value with additional copies or your Urza Saga constructs and that sort of thing. I know that some of my near and dear friends like Alex McKinley and Anthony Laverde are very high on this card, but personally, I'm a little bit lukewarm because I don't view that as what Cephalid Breakfast really wants to be doing. That said, I don't think Stoneforge is amazing either. The two of you have played more Breakfast than I have recently. What are your thoughts?
So I'll talk about this from the other side of the table. When my Cephalid Breakfast opponent plays a turn 2 Stoneforge, and that just represents a Cauldra that I have to deal with, or I die in a couple of turns to it, while I'm dedicating resources to fighting against that stuff, they have time to set up a combo kill. Like, I'm very scared of Stoneforge for Cauldra personally. I feel like I have all the time in the world versus Staff of the Storyteller. When a Stoneforge is played, a lot of times I'm like, oh shit, like I am in mortal danger. When a Staff of the Storyteller gets played, I'm like, that's whatever. I'll start sweating if the second or third one comes down.
And Stoneforge Mystic presents this puzzle to solve on the stack, which is if your hand has Force of Will and Swords to Plowshares, like if they're getting Cauldra, you're fine with Swords to Plowshares. If they're getting Shuko, you wish you had forced the Stoneforge on the stack because they're starting to set their combo up where like Plow can also interact with their combo, but now they're not just hanging out their plan A threat that gets plowed and you wish you had, and they're going to take time to set it up. The other card that gets played in this slot is Baleful Strix, which is a thing that draws cards and blocks threats out of Delver and decks that are trying to attack you. Staff still blocks, but it doesn't have Death Touch. You're giving up a lot of leverage against a deck like Delver with Staff because you're not actually trading off. They can just pound through those things. In my experience playing Breakfast, I have loved Stoneforge Mystic. Like I just mentioned, Oracle comes out of hand as often as it comes out of the graveyard. Cauldra comes in as often as any of those other things too. It's a genuine multi-pronged attack when you have Stoneforge, Urza Saga, and you can Oracle from hand or from the graveyard. There's just so much going on in that it's hard to cover all of it. staff, I am just like, okay, there's that. They're going to draw some cards.
As a secondary thing, while we're in this section, I also found a list that had Shaman Encore, which is 1 colorless and a white for a 1/2 with the same 0 mana ability that Nomad's Encore has. I was not excited when I saw this because I usually don't feel like you need more of this side of the combo since Shuko is tutorable with Stoneforge and Urza Saga, but I figured it was worth pointing out while we're kind of going into the weeds of what you could reasonably see.
It was a backup piece in the extended era of Cephalid Breakfast, but it's been a long time since I've read that card name. I would say that this is a techie card, but ultimately it kind of feels like it's on the trash side.
Yeah, like, what are we playing around? Like, Nomad's getting Surgical, and then also Aether Vial on Shuko, and then also my Urza Saga and Stoneforge Mystic can't get the game won.
The year is 2018. Phyrexian Revoker is everywhere.
Yep, that is not the case. Okay, we have about 3 minutes left in this episode, and we still have 5 decks we wanted to talk about. Let's just speedrun a couple of these. Elves, Newton's out there going nuts. The thing that I saw recently, like, I'm very used to Newton coming up with something crazy, and we all should be at this point. The thing that raised my eyebrows recently is I saw that Elves has incorporated an Urza Saga package. So now you can Zenith for Reclaimer, Reclaimer for Saga, Saga for Soul Guide Lantern, and cover anything given infinite time. So I am not testing this build. Newton is. I know he's very proud of the list, and shout out to Newton for not being afraid to go deep into the depths on that one.
All right. Why don't we jump to Reanimator with Tyrannox Rex, which I suppose I need to read because that's a new enough one here. So this is, we'll ignore the mana cost. You're not doing it from hand. It is an 8/8 uncounterable, trample, ward 4, haste, toxic 4 creature. I'm not excited about this out of a Reanimator deck. Like, you have access to all of the fatties that have ever been printed, and I don't feel like I need an 8/8 haste creature to get the job done if I can get a Grizzlebrand or an Atraxa or an Archon of Cruelty or a Sarah's Emissary into play. Like, I get that haste sometimes gets you over the finish line immediately, but I am not excited about this card as a Reanimator player.
I would agree with you, but the devil's advocate is that Ward 4 in Legacy essentially says hexproof, and you can't Caracas or Swords it very easily, and it kills you with very few, direct hits. Because obviously your opponent can chump, but the Toxic 4 kills you. I don't approve of it, but I understand it.
Yeah, Ward 4, I have plowed and pyroblasted many Kappa Cannoneers in my life. Eventually you do get 5 mana, but Tyrannox Rex having you dead in 3 hits with haste, turn 1, you are not going to clear this thing if it comes into play. Where Grizzlebrand, Archon of Cruelty, all these other things that Miracle, White Source, Swords to Plowshares destabilize is still alive. It's simply not against Rex, but I don't know if Reanimator needs to solve that specific problem.
Next up, I found a Cloudpost list that was playing Mawloc. This is another one of those Warhammer 40k cards, so sorry Magic Online gamers, none for you. This is red-green X for a 2/2 Tyrannid creature with Ravenous. It gets a +1/+1 counter for each mana you put into X, and if X is 5 or more, you draw a card. It has Terror from the Deep. When it enters the battlefield, it fights up to 1 target creature an opponent controls. If that would die, it gets exiled instead. I think this is a legacy playable card, but what the fuck are you doing with it in your Cloudpost deck list? You are not making red-green consistently. Stop it. Stop it.
Yeah, I mean, Post is frequently a Zenith deck, and it can just remove Collector Oof out of a Zenith. If you're at the phase of the game where you're casting Mawloc for 22, you draw a card, kill anything, and then one-shot your opponent, whatever. But yeah, I don't know how often we're getting red mana and green at the same time on purpose. Next one is the Temur Cascade deck. This is Legacy Rhinos with Crashing Footfalls. This is a modern staple deck. In Legacy, we have Simeon and Elvish Spirit Guides to power out turn 1 cans of Rhinos. If you watch my channel, you know Rhinos come in cans. Time Minsk and Boo in this deck. This build does not have Uro in it, but I've seen Uro in builds like this, It's basically a rug tempo deck, Teamer Tempo, and it is adopted directly from the modern strategy.
Do we think that this is a real deck? Like, do you think that this will be something people will be playing in 6 months competitively?
It depends on what competitively means. It is being played by Eco Baronin, who is a Magic Online Hall of Famer. Not literal Hall of Fame, but if there was a Magic Online Hall of Fame, he would be in it. He did make second place in the challenge. And this is literally a modern deck with Minsk and Boo, Force of Will, and Spirit Guides added. The strategy is here. There is no backup plan. Even the 2 Murktide Regents in the creature base, this is straight from Modern. Just adapted a few cards for the format. And this is a powerful proactive strategy. 8 power of trample on turn 1 is a lot to deal with, especially backed with the counterspells that Legacy offers. 4 force of negation, 4 force of will in this beast. I can see it being in that like cheese garbage wheelhouse that Stompy is in for the discerning player who enjoys casting Force of Will. Stompy decks with Force of Will, are those good? Is 8 cast good? It could be in the same wheelhouse as that.
I feel like this deck kicks my ass anytime I'm playing a questionable deck. It just has the capability of producing 8 to 10 power on turn 1, and you cannot underestimate that when backed by counterspells. I don't know how it feels to play against this with like, you know, a reasonable blue deck with a couple of Supreme Verdicts and counter magic, but playing questionable stuff, deck feels good from the other side of the table.
I believe that Legacy players are often slow to adapt to ideas from other formats, and this seems like one of those things that we could have been sleeping on for some time, that this is the best deck in Modern, how is it not remotely playable in Legacy? I'm willing to believe that this could be the real thing.
This isn't unheard of. People have been doing this since basically Minsk and Boo was printed. You got another thing that's worth doing in the colors that doesn't mess with your cascade. And we are adopting some of the tech from Modern. Like I said, these 2 Murktide Regents at the top end, straight out of the Modern list. I think honing in on the deck list, this could be a very real thing. We got one more for you, and this is a new card from March of the Machine Aftermath. And this is in Sneak and Show. This is the other 3 mana 2/4 flyer I alluded to earlier. 2 and a blue, Vesuvan Drifter, creature shapeshifter, 2/4 flying. You can look at the top card of your library anytime. At the beginning of each combat, you may reveal the top card of your library. If you reveal a creature this way, Vesuvan Drifter becomes a copy of that card until end of turn, except it has flying. Is this the Arcane Artisan that we wish Arcane Artisan was? This appears to be a reasonable body at a mana cost that Sneak and Show is already designed to accommodate. And it's a thing that, what are you going to fight over this? And hope to, like, if you could let this resolve and hope to fade the creature on top for a while, you could spend your removal on this and then die to the actual show and tell. This makes cantrips really good. Like a Brainstorm can flip the thing from Emrakul into Grizzlebrand or whatever, or put the Emrakul in hand on top. This feels like more copies of Show and Tell in a way that's kind of interesting, though it does open up main deck Swords to Plowshare. Like Swords to Plowshares is a real tool if we're main decking this thing. So I think this is one of the more exciting things we've talked about on this episode.
I will absolutely be recording with this card this week. I learned about this card 40 minutes ago, 50 minutes ago, whatever, when we first started recording this, and I went, oh, this is cool. Like, this is one of those ones where I have to have the firsthand experience playing this one. I have a feeling it's probably on the wrong side of the line, but this is going to dodge a lot of the things that people might bring in against you, because it's just like looking at the top of your library. I think this one's really neat.
In the context of Sneak and Show, that is one of the few decks left in Legacy that is playing the classic cantrip cartel of Brainstorm, Ponder, and Preordain. A lot of decks have moved off Preordain. You could still use Preordain to set this card up. So that's 12 ways to make this card active, on top of just the random, oh hey, look, it's an Emrakul. It being a 2/4, we talked about it not dying to Lightning Bolt. I'm willing to believe that this could be real.
Yeah, same here.
I may or may not have my TCG card open right now, putting them in my cart. This feels like a card that, even if it doesn't end up breaking the bar of playability, it's still going to be one of those cards that if you keep a Legacy Playables binder, you probably want access to this thing because it's going to pop up here and there.
All right, so there's your financial advice of the day. Buy your Vesuvan drifters. If you need them in Japanese foil, get them now. Bryant, have you added them to your cart yet?
I'm not really a Sneak and Show fan. I'm sorry.
More out there for the rest of our listeners. All right, folks, we hope you enjoyed. We kind of had to whirlwind through the second half of these, but remember, if you are mad about anything we said in this episode, tag Bryant on Twitter and blame him. He said everything that was bad, and we said everything that was good.